There's not much more humbling than having someone put you in a position on the ground and hold you there despite your very best efforts to get out of it and either tap you out or choke you out. And there's just really nothing you can do about it.
Hello, everyone. How are you? You're tuned into Whistlekick Martial Arts Radio, episode 716. My guest today is Sensei Aric Conto. Who am I? Well, I'm Jeremy Lesniak. I'm Whistlekick founder and host for this show, where everything we do is in support of the traditional martial arts. If you want to know more about what we're doing, go to whistlekick.com. That's the place to learn about all of our projects and products. It's also the place to find our store. And if you use the code podcast15, it's going to save you 15% on anything over there, from apparel to training equipment to programs, you name it, it's going to get you 15%. The show, Martial Arts Radio, gets its own website, and we named it pretty simply whistlekickmartialartsradio.com. We bring you 2 episodes each and every week, and well, why do we do that? We're working hard to connect, educate, and entertain traditional martial artists throughout the world. If you want to support the work that we do, there are lots of ways you can do that. You can make a purchase, maybe tell a friend about what we're doing, or join our Patreon. Patreon.com/whistlekick is the place to go. You can support us monthly with as little as $2. You want to know who's coming up on the show? $2 will give you that information. $5 a month, you get access to a bonus audio episode, and it goes up from there. If you haven't checked it out, go check it out. There's a lot of good stuff going on Patreon. And if you want the full list of all the ways you can help us in our mission, as well as a constantly shifting mix of behind the scenes and other fun, exclusive content, type in, there's no link for it, whistlekick.com/family. I had the opportunity to meet Sensei Conto back at Free Training Day 2021. And what a nice guy, what a knowledgeable guy. And I had a feeling that that would lead to a good conversation. And guess what? I was right. We had a I shouldn't speak for him. I had a wonderful time. I think he did too. I think it's a great episode. 2 guys just talking about martial arts with a number of points where I think we could say statistically things went kind of differently than maybe they, quote, should have. It's an interesting story. His story is one I really enjoyed. And I hope you do too. So here we go. Aric, welcome to Whistlekick Martial Arts Radio.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. I met you at Free Training Day, like so many others. I met you at Free Training Day, and Andy brought you up, and I feel like I know you so much more than I should based on that limited time, though. Do you also feel that? Well, you said you were listening to some episodes before.
Yeah, well, the training day was a great event, and I'm glad we had a chance to meet. I appreciate the invitation. It was a wonderful event, and just a great chance to get exposure and mix and mingle with like-minded folks and get some cross training in. I really enjoyed it, and it was nice that we got to share dinner and have a drink afterwards and get to know each other.
Yeah, that's, I think that's such an important part. You said something that's really important to me. It's the like-minded piece. We can train the same stuff, but if we don't approach it with the same mindset, it might as well be, Shotokan and golf. But I think sharing those meals, sharing those off the mat, if you will, experiences, I think really build something that we can fall back on.
Yeah, I agree. And I think some relationships, some connections were made, and probably some long-term relationships. I mean, here we are together having a conversation, and hooked up with some folks that I met there through social media and sharing some stories. And I think actually, I think Andy Rodriguez, who you spoke to before, my teacher, I think he actually traveled up and met with some folks recently that he came in contact with. Yeah. So
Nice.
he was making a trip up north, and I think he connected with some of the folks from the from the Krav Maga there in Manhattan. Yeah.
It's interesting to watch relationships follow those kind of viral models. People meet and then they introduce them to other people, and we can track the spread of various martial arts styles in that way and everything. And I find that really interesting. But what I love about what we do with Free Training Day is how do I say this? It's a lot easier to get further training with friends than strangers. If you and I have some time in and I trust you and you slip and now I'm, went a little bit too far on my elbow, I know it was an accident because we've got time in, or, your punch, you don't pull your punch quite as well as maybe you normally do. And now I'm bruised up, or, heaven forbid, push my nose out of place a bit. But if we've got time in, I can trust that was abnormal. You're not a jerk.
Yeah. That familiarity breeds a trust. That breeds a trust. And once you find that level of trust in your training partners, you can relax. In karate, they call it an uke, right? Or in judo, they call it an uke. So you're there to receive their technique, and you give to your partner. You don't resist. You don't fight with them. You don't hold a grudge if they slip a little bit, because that's part of the training process. It's all a give and take, and it's a lot easier to share that experience with someone you're familiar with, someone you're comfortable with.
It's true. And then hopefully someday somebody's willing to okay for you and give you their body, because, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you train. If you don't have the use of another person's physical form, you're only going to go so far.
Yeah. Everything can't be a contest. Contests are great. Pressure testing is great, but everything can't be a contest all the time. It just creates a closed-minded, combative, fall back on the basics, fall back on what survival instinct, and it's hard to grow that way.
You're never going to do anything new under pressure.
Yeah, exactly. When you're under real pressure or your partner is non-compliant, you fall back on what gets the job done, and it's hard to grow.
Right. You ever had, probably not an uke, because usually that means you're demonstrating in front of a group, but you ever had a partner who just, they're making you work for it too hard, and you just like pop them in the face, and then you go, and then you go on with it. They're like, oh, that's my, I just pop them in the nose like a dog. I'm just like, stop it.
I think, unfortunately, that's part of spending most of your life training. You have a lot of that, especially when you start training as a kid and you train through your teenage years. I don't think there are too many, at least not back in the 70s and 80s. There aren't too many young men that don't enjoy the spirit of a good contest. So there always seems to be resistance, even when there's not supposed to be resistance.
I was making you work for it.
Yeah.
Those weren't the instructions.
Yeah. But there's been probably quite a few occasions, more than I would like, where your partners are just non-compliant. It's just part of it.
It takes all kinds, and it's good that it takes all kinds, because that's what helps us get better.
Yeah.
So
How'd you get started?
Funny story.
Ooh, I like funny stories. Okay.
Well, I don't know if it's funny or not, but it sounds funny to me looking back at it. And I haven't thought about these things in a long time. But I'm 54 now. I started training when I was 8. So this was back in the 70s.
It's uncommon for somebody that young at that time.
Yeah, because there's nothing around, right? Nothing was happening back then, especially where I was. So I grew up in a little town called Malone in upstate New York, right up on the Canadian border. And I was a real sort of a typical story, but for a lot of guys that get started in martial arts, but I was a real sickly kid. I was kind of small and weak, had asthma, terrible asthma, and spent a lot of time growing up with inhalers, medications, in and out of the hospital. I remember as a child being in oxygen tents. I don't even know if they still do that. But I go in, get a shot of adrenaline to open everything up, then they stick you in an oxygen tent so you can breathe for a while. And I didn't like being sick. It was frustrating. And here's the funny part of the story. 1976, a movie comes out, Rocky. I know it sounds cheesy, but I went to see that movie as a kid. And to me, it was so inspiring. You know, here was this guy who really had nothing, wasn't in very good shape, didn't take very good care of himself, but he persevered and became something. And of course, all the Rocky training scenes and the music and I watched that when I was a kid. I came out of there and I said, man, I've got to learn how to box. I've got to box. So I went home, and at the time I was living with my grandmother. And I said, I need to learn how to box. What can we do? She goes, not much. I can't teach you how to box, but and you couldn't just go buy a heavy bag anywhere, you know. So she and she was great. She was a big part of my life as a child. So she actually made a heavy bag for me. She was a seamstress. She sewed all the time. So she made a heavy bag.
Out of what?
I don't know, out of canvas or cloth or something. She made this big bag, and she stuffed it full of all these sewing scraps and stuff that she used to use, and hung it up in the garage. She said, there you go. And I took a pair of her gardening gloves. She had a garden out back. And I cut the fingers out of the gardening gloves, and I would stand out there and hit this bag.
I love it.
So I would stand in the garage and hit this bag and try to figure out what I was doing. And then one day my mother comes home. She goes, you know, the YMCA has a youth boxing program. I said, Mom, you got to take me there. So that's kind of how that started. It was 76, I think. And there was a little boxing program at the Y, probably 4 or 5 kids. We went in there. We learned how to throw punches and move around. And I was terrible. I was terrible at it because I would be out of breath in like half of a round.
Yeah.
But stuck with it as much as I could and really enjoyed it. And that was probably my first step into the martial arts world. From there, I don't think there was any turning back.
What age were you when you didn't need an inhaler anymore?
About the end of grade school, maybe 12-ish or so. That kind of went away. Yeah. I always felt like I kind of worked my way through it. I know a lot of people will outgrow those conditions, but I was always trying to push against it. I tried to play basketball in grade school. I couldn't play basketball because I couldn't run. I used to have to wear this mask when I went outside in the wintertime up there to kind of, I couldn't breathe in like really cold air. So I'm walking around with a mask. But once I started the boxing as a kid and really tried to work out and increase my wind, I felt like I was fighting against something. I felt like I was trying to push it back and make myself strong.
I knew a number of kids growing up that trained karate with me, and they seemed like most of them was somewhere between blue belt and green belt. They didn't need their inhaler anymore.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, obviously exercise transforms your body. Yeah. And at that age, you're growing and developing so fast anyway. I'd like to think that it was a combination of the two that kind of pushed that to the side. And it was about the same year or the following year that my mother, she started dating. My mother was divorced. Mm-hmm. She started dating a gentleman in town there in Malone who was a martial arts practitioner. Mm. I had no idea, but in that little tiny town, there was a Kyokushin Karate school. I didn't know what that was, but I started to get to know this person who would later on become my stepfather. Ultimately, he and my mother got married. And he invited me up to the dojo one day. He said, "Oh, it's good you're boxing. If you want, come up here and you can watch some karate and Kyokushin." I had no idea what he was talking about, but I went up to this dojo in town. I think I was 8 or 9. And they were all lined up in a row with white gis, punching, kicking, pounding on makiwaras, hitting heavy bags, which I loved. And I said, "Man, this is great. How do I do this?" Of course, I had a free pass because he was dating my mom, right?
Sure.
So
I wasn't going to say no to that.
There were no kids up there. They didn't have any real kids classes. There were probably some older teenagers. Everybody else was adults. But I got to line up in the back and start to learn kihon and basics. And that's where, as soon as I started doing that, I didn't go back to the YMCA anymore. I focused on that full time.
Rocky to boxing, that makes sense. You saw what was on screen. You had an idea of where the path might lead, right? Same reason we watch sports movies or superhero movies. We see something representative on screen that we want to embody, even in part. Was the relationship with this man that later became your stepfather, was it similar? Did you like him? Did you look up to him and say, "Oh, if I do this, I can become more like him"?
You know, I don't want to say that I had a troubled youth, but my father was not a very good part of my life. He was gone before I knew who he was. Occasionally he would pop in, make a promise here or there, usually not fulfill those promises, and then kind of be gone again. So my expectations, I think, for a male role model were pretty low. And then along comes this guy, seems to be pretty good to my mother. He's around all the time, very fit, very strong guy. And that mattered a lot to me as a kid because I was not. And most importantly, he was really good to me. He involved me in things, gave me some respect as a child. You know, a lot of adults treat kids like kids. He always treated me like a friend. So I liked him. And he was a big influence. So when he invited me up to the dojo up there, and I think he was maybe a EQ, like a brown belt at the time or something. I don't know how long he'd been up there. But when he invited me up there and I watched him train and saw everybody else, that was a very positive influence. So I guess looking back at it, thinking of him as a father figure, even before he actually came one, I wanted approval.
Mm.
You know, I wanted approval and I wanted him to respect me. So I was happy to jump in line and train. And once I got involved, I really, truly loved it. It was very formative as a kid. I think it still defines a lot of who I am today. Even though I've trained in lots of other martial arts over the next 40 years, I've always thought of myself as a karate guy.
Mm.
And it influenced me through some of the other training too. Some things I was good at, some things not so good. Karate doesn't always translate.
It's true.
Yeah.
I have this theory that for the majority of people who start training, if they stick with it, it's because martial arts provided something to them that they were lacking in their life at the time that they started. We think we've already kind of unpacked that. There was desire for male role model, probably some structure, some camaraderie. If you were living with your grandmother, I'm sure most of us can infer some things from that. But I'm wondering if you were aware at 8 years old that you were doing something very few 8-year-olds were doing. From what you've said, it sounds like at least 7-8 years minimum between you and the next youngest kid there. So you're kind of at a place, which is something that a lot of 8-year-olds aren't going to be good at for long periods of time. Oh no, I really want to do this. And here we are, 3 weeks later, I'm the only kid. Right? A lot of parents out there probably nodding along going, yep, I've heard my kids say that. How did you move past that?
What's odd is I think I'm an only child.
Okay.
So it doesn't mean I didn't have friends growing up but I didn't mind being alone. Mm-hmm. I didn't mind not having other kids around. I knew that there were no other children in the dojo, but it never really made me feel uncomfortable. Another funny story. Everybody there had a gi. Mm. The gis came up. The teacher there, his name was Anthony Zeno. He trained under Shigeru Oyama, who Maso Oyama sent to the United States back in the maybe 60s or early 70s to promote his Kyokushin Karate in the U.S. So all the folks there had gis. The gis came up from New York City. I didn't have one. There were no kids' gis to be found. No. This was, again, 76, 77. Another reason, you may hear me mention my grandmother more than once, but I went home, I said, man, I wish I had one of these karate outfits. She said, why don't you see but I said, you can't get them. They come from Japan, New York City. I said, I don't know where to get them. She said, why don't you get one and bring it home? And again, she was a seamstress. She said, get one, bring it home. She said, I'll make you one. Mm. I said, okay, because I believed anything she told me. So I brought one home. Sure enough, she made a pattern out of it, sized it to me, got some white canvas, and made me a gi. And it's one of those things that as a kid, kids are very particular, but I was certainly not ashamed to wear it. Mm. So I showed up at the Kyokushin Dojo in this homemade gi that my grandmother made. And it was perfect. I wish I still had it. I don't know where it was, where it went to, but I wish I still had it.
My mother did the same thing because I would have been like a quadruple zero when I started. And I think she does still have it.
Oh, that's awesome. You ought to keep that. You ought to treasure that.
Absolutely. But that idea that, where did your first gi come from? Somebody made it, and that's, I think it's a great illustration of the commitment around, right? 4 years old, 5 years old, 8 years old, 12 years old. It's really hard for a kid to stick with something if they don't have the support and the recognition. Oh, let's get them the uniform. Let's get them the whatever it might have been to her, the right equipment, because that was something she saw that, who knows what she saw in it for you, but she saw enough in it for you that she was willing to put in the work.
Yeah. Yeah. She did a lot of that for me growing up. And I think what you just said is pretty key too, the right equipment, because it really is a piece of equipment. And I realize now, the more I train, especially like, later on, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, gi, no gi, you realize the gi is a tool. It's a piece of equipment. And I needed that piece of equipment. I was already the youngest, certainly the smallest, no experience. So that piece of equipment really helped me feel comfortable when I stood in line at the dojo there. So it made a big difference.
I get that. Okay. So Kyokushin, and then where's the next kind of, I don't know, point in time that we want to talk about?
Well, the Kyokushin there, and again, I've looked back and thought about it and tried to come up with a timeline, because of course you don't keep track of these things over the years. But yeah, it was about 5 years or so that I trained there with my stepfather and at Anthony Zeno's dojo. Oyama came up one time during that. He came up a couple times. I only saw him once. And Shigeru Oyama, not Mas Oyama. Yeah, he came up. He would send folks up occasionally. There was another school in White Plains. Those folks would come up and visit too. But it was 81. And of course, my mother and my stepfather were married then. And Anthony Zeno, who ran the dojo there, moved to Florida to open a restaurant. We ended up moving to Florida as well because, it's crazy, because my stepfather, Larry, went to work for him in this restaurant.
Okay.
So I went from upstate New York all the way down to Florida. And I was there for a year. But in this year, we shared a duplex. So I lived in this duplex with Anthony Zeno, who was like fourth degree black belt in Kyokushin. Then my stepfather was a shodan, I think, at that time. And there I was, the little kid still tagging along in my homemade gi. So we lived down there for a year. I think they trained every day in this carport outside of this duplex. And every day I was out there with them, training, push-ups, kata, kihon. Still too small to do a lot of fighting with them, but I did the best I could. That was a pretty remarkable year for me, just to have that time directly with those two guys, especially at that age. You're like 12, 13 years old. And you just spend it training with these two Kyokushinkai guys. Then from there, life finally slowed down a little bit. We moved one more time. I ended up in Virginia. We moved back to Virginia. Stepfather moved again for work. And actually, I'm living in that same town now. Full circle. Yeah, full circle. From 14 to 54, I came back. So now I'm living in Culpeper again, teaching karate here. So it's there was some jumping going on at that time.
When was the first time you started doing something that wasn't Kyokushin?
It was a while. So when we moved to Virginia, it was 1982. And of course, my stepfather, when he moved here, first thing he did was open up a dojo in Culpeper. So there was a Kyokushin dojo in Culpeper. And there I trained from the time I was 14 all the way through my early 20s in the Kyokushin Dojo. And of course, during that time, we went out and did a lot of competition. So we'd go fight with other Kyokushin schools, but we'd also go out. That's when point fighting was pretty big. There was a lot of point fighting, and continuous contact became a thing where you would fight with light contact. You've probably been through all this yourself, but you'd fight with light contact and they'd score points and keep track of it. We were all terrible at it because, well, we were all Kyokushin guys, right? So we're used to just really pounding each other.
Oh, I can't cut you off at the knee with my shin? What? That's
you can't just throw.
That's not okay.
Yeah, you can't throw continuous thigh kicks and full power punches to the body. That's not good. Where are my points, right? So we were all terrible at it, but we would go out and do these tournaments to stay sharp.
Yeah.
But the first time that I really moved away from Kyokushin to do something different was probably in '96. I was still living in Virginia, but I wanted to branch out and do something different. I started working as a corrections officer. Now I'm in my mid-20s. I started working as a corrections officer in Virginia, in the Virginia system, which was interesting in itself. You go through the police academy, and of course, I wanted to be involved in everything because I really enjoyed pressure testing. So put me on the PERT team, the emergency response team, and let me work in segregation special housing. And if they had a cell extraction team, sign me up. I have to be part of that. So as much activity as I could get, it was almost like training, just extra pressure testing.
That's right.
Yeah, which was it was a lot of fun, but it ran its course pretty quickly. It's kind of a depressing place to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see that.
But during that time, I did a little bit of Thai boxing. First time I really branched out was a little bit of Thai boxing. There was a Thai boxing gym up in D.C., in Lorton, outside of D.C. So I would travel up there. It was almost an hour drive. And I would travel up there just once a week to try to pick up the skills of Thai boxing, learn how to move like a Thai boxer. I did that for about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years. So that's probably my first time branching out and doing anything other than Kyokushin.
If I had to pick another martial art that I was aware of that I think philosophically was similar to Kyokushin, it probably would be Muay Thai. That's interesting. That's where you ended up.
Yeah. It was a good fit. The styles are similar. And I think back in the day, they used to kind of pit one against the other. But Muay Thai is, it's not really a lot like boxing.
No.
Not like Western boxing.
No, certainly.
It's not. There's a lot of close quarter clinch work, a lot of knee and elbow, and a lot of advancing. It's always an advancing, power striking type of system. And that's really what I wanted at the time, was just to figure out how to hit harder and hit better. Because that's all we did, right?
Right.
So I needed more of that. But I learned how to advance. They move with a lot of frames. They move a lot of frames, these big structures to intercept attacks and then counter off that. And I wanted to learn how to be proficient with the elbows like they were, all those good cutting elbows and skipping knees. I learned footwork there that I never had in Kyokushin. We just didn't have it. We just kind of moved forward. And I mean, you've probably, if you've ever watched it.
One of my original styles was Kyokushin.
Okay.
And rather than footwork, it was, if it hurts, it means you didn't do enough conditioning.
Yes. Yes.
Get out why are you getting out of the way? You lose position if you get out of the way. Let them hit you and then hit them harder. That's how I was brought up.
Yeah, that's right. It's all about conditioning, and it builds a mentality of invincibility. Right? How much pain can you take? Not necessarily a good thing.
No, it had, that philosophy has a place, I think. But I don't think it builds long-term affinity for training. If all you know is pain, that speaks to a certain kind of person.
You know what's funny too is I still am in touch with some of the guys that I trained with, and one of them still trains with me now. I hesitate to call him a student because he is certainly at least a peer. But we get together and train, and I share knowledge with him, and he shares knowledge with me.
Cool.
But we still have that mentality, and because we grew up that way, we still have that mentality of, if we didn't push ourselves to the point of either physical exhaustion, or if we don't have some battle scars to show, then we didn't really train hard. Yeah. And now we're older. We can't do that anymore. So we sit around and we criticize each other for doing it. Right? His name is Mike, and Mike, we need to slow down. We need to take care of ourselves. Now he's actively training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu still. So he's a brown belt. He trains with the Yamasaki Club up in Northern Virginia. And he still will call and talk about this injury or that injury. And I'm a few years older than he is, so I'm always like, Mike, you got to dial it back. That scar tissue just keeps accumulating, But it's been hard for us to get out of that mentality, and I think it's just because we grew up that way. But we're getting better at it. We're getting better.
Regression is real. Get together with some friends from high school and tell me you're not acting like you're 16 again. At least it happens for me every single time.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll get together and tell stories about when we were 16. And we also sometimes, sadly, train like we're 16, and we're not. But we have a great time. He's a skilled martial artist, and I always enjoy the exchange. We learn a lot from each other.
Now, you mentioned you've got some time in with BJJ, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So, in the late 90s, got married, changed careers, and moved to Maryland. And I was right on the border between Maryland and Delaware, a little town called Northeast Maryland. And at that time, right in that area, it was kind of like a little martial arts mecca. There was just a lot going on up there. There was Gracie Jiu-Jitsu School, which was hard to find in 97, 98, especially here. I mean, on the West Coast, maybe not so much, but there, that was kind of hard to find. There was a good boxing gym up there too, which I found later. But funny story, when I first went up there, once I got settled into the new career path and I was traveling a lot, I was working in sales. I said, man, I got to find a place to train. Looking around, found this Gracie Jiu-Jitsu school up there, Hicks and Gracie, no less. I said, man, this is great, because the UFC had just come out. So you could see UFC fights and the Gracies were dominating everything. I said, okay, I got to go here, see what's going on. So I go there and I walk in, the guys are, now, granted, it sounds silly now because everybody knows, jiu-jitsu's fantastic on the ground. Okay. But as a Kyokushin guy, you walk in and you see these guys rolling around on the ground. You go, really?
What are you doing down there? Get up. I'm not allowed to kick you when you're down there.
Yeah, I'm like, okay. And they said they were doing MMA training. They said, come back on Saturdays. I said, when do you guys do MMA? When are you up punching and kicking? Because, I want to do that. They said, come back on Saturdays. We have MMA. I said, okay. So I came back on Saturday. Now, mind you, this school, and I've heard this expression before, it was kind of a Shark Tank school, if that makes sense. I didn't realize it at the time. It still is. The school's still there. It's changed affiliations several times, which is part of the reason that I left ultimately. And it's very much an MMA school now. So this was the mentality there, which was fine at the time. So I went back that Saturday, and they were doing MMA sparring. I said, okay, great. Put on the gear. I said, that's all right. Unless you make me do it, I'm not going to wear any gear. We put on a little gear. First fight, I line up. There's a white belt there. And I told them I had plenty of experience. So bang, 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 white belt's gone pretty quick. And I'm feeling good. I'm like, yeah, see, I don't think this jiu-jitsu is all that it's cracked up to be, right? I know. I'm
laughing because we've all heard this story. We've all been part of it. So many of us have been part of this story at one point, in that 95 to 2000, maybe as late as 2002, like that 5 to 7 years. But please continue.
You know where it's going.
Oh, I do.
So blue belt comes up.
It's always a blue belt.
Yeah. Well, blue belt was okay. Blue belt came up, took a little long. He just wasn't able to close. Bang, bang, bang. He's done. I said, man, I knew it. Then a purple belt stands up. Tall, lanky, skinny kid who ended up being a great friend of mine, who actually taught me more than anyone else there. But this guy comes up. He was probably 160 pounds. At that time, I was 230 pounds. I used to do a lot of strength training and weightlifting, so I was a pretty big guy.
Sure.
And this guy, I looked at him, I thought, oh my goodness, I hope I don't hurt this fellow. Within 30 seconds, my initial clash, all of a sudden I'm on my back, trying to get up. I think there were some points to be proven too, because it was that kind of Saturday. So there was no tapping. I don't even know if I knew how to tap, but I knew how to go to sleep. Yeah. So I woke up. On the mat, on my back, looking up, having no idea where I was or what happened. And I remember distinctly him taking my back as I tried to get up, taking the rear naked choke. And I heard this sound. It was like a boom, boom. And I said, man, somebody left the phone off the hook. It sounded like the phone was off the hook. The old landline phone beeping. I think it was my heart rate. So I was looking around the room and I saw everything kind of close in. And that was the last thing I remember. I woke up. Took me a little while to figure out where I was. And I went over and gave that guy a hug. And then I went over to the instructor there. I said, hey, sign me up. And that was the beginning of my journey into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
I want to unpack that moment, that realization, because what I like about this story, and I don't just mean your version of this story, but the multiple versions of this story that I've heard personally, either on the show or off the show, is that one of two things always happens. You start off, you're feeling good. You're like, I got this. Like these guys, like, what's the big deal here? And then eventually somebody shows you, here's the big deal. Here's where you're missing. Here's your gap. Not everyone handles it the way you do. Some of them say, there's some kind of distancing that goes on, some kind of rationalization to justify, well, here's why that happened and here's why I'm not going to plug that hole. What was it about your training, your personality, whatever, that you wake up from being choked out and your response is, I want to get better?
I think that I have always been, and I still am, a perpetual student. If I see something that makes sense or works, or somehow I'm missing or could better my game or my skill set as a martial artist, I like to learn more about it. We had a Iwa Dojo 20-year anniversary this weekend. Went up and trained, and I met one of the guys came up from Florida, and they said, "How is it that you've trained at so many different places?" And I said, "Gosh, I guess because there's so much to learn." So I think to answer your question, I think it wasn't. I didn't really have a big ego that needed to be adjusted. I think that there was a lesson to learn. I had never been put in that situation. It was very humble. And I still tell people to this day, and I've trained in judo since then and Brazilian jiu-jitsu on and off up until very recently. There's not much more humbling than having someone put you in a position on the ground and hold you there despite your very best efforts to get out of it, and either tap you out or choke you out. And there's just really nothing you can do about it. It's a very humbling experience. And I think if you don't take it the right way, if you have insecurities that are deep-seated, that may bring them out, and that may happen. And you may go, you know what? That was a fluke. I'm not going to deal with that. I'm going to walk away back to my comfortable reality, and I'm going to stay there and call myself good. But if you want to learn and you feel confident in yourself and your abilities, that shouldn't have that effect on you. It's just an opportunity to grow. And that's the way I saw it. It was very humble. And I've been humbled many times since then. And every time I feel that, it's just another opportunity to grow.
Again, growing up at the time that you did, the martial arts era that you did, ego was even stronger within the martial arts then than it is now. And people who didn't train back then may not fully understand that you were taught that your instructor was probably infallible. And if anybody could beat them up, it was their instructor, and that was about it. But I'm going to guess that somewhere in there, you were taught that learning more is good.
Yeah, I think so. Learning more is always good. And it may be the way that I was raised. I was raised being humbled. I was a kid in a grown-up dojo. I was trained by my father.
Ego was irrelevant to you.
Ego didn't matter.
Because what was the point? I mean, younger, smaller, asthmatic, less experienced. Like there's nothing you're going to do to justify your own ego around your martial arts skill at that time based on who you're with. You had to be humble.
Yeah, I had to be humble because there was no one there that I could humble.
Right.
So I was always being humble. So maybe you just you grow up that way in those formative years. You just kind of accept the fact that that's the way it's going to work. Not that I didn't have an ego. I went in there with an ego. I felt pretty good about myself at that time. I was in my late 20s and at my peak of abilities. So I thought, but I discovered there was a lot more to learn.
Yeah.
Yep.
you've I'm sure heard variations on the saying, if you're the smartest person in the room or the toughest person in the room, find a different room, a bigger room. And that's kind of what I'm hearing. I mean, you started out as by far the smallest fish in the pond, and it sounds like life kept throwing you into these bigger and bigger ponds, and you kept remaining one of the smaller fish.
Yeah. I think that's a good analogy. And isn't that where you want to be? Again, I don't know what it is, but I think that those folks that kind of prop themselves up, and I hate to say that, I don't want to sound derogatory, but they kind of prop themselves up and they stop exposing themselves to folks that are better than them. They stop exposing themselves to pressure. Pressure matters. Pressure helps you grow. Guy I boxed with, his name was Richard Stewart. He was a pro boxer in Tiberi's gym in Delaware. Around the same time all the jiu-jitsu was going on, I was boxing as well. Cool. And he made a comment to me. He was a cruiserweight. I went in there. I was a heavyweight. I don't claim to be a heavyweight boxer. I mean, I learned the fundamentals, but I was certainly a heavyweight at the time. But he just was a swarmer. He would just stay on you and just keep hitting you and hitting you and hitting you. He was relentless. He would take a shot to give two. He would take a hard shot to give a harder shot. And I was talking to him after 3 or 4 rounds, maybe 4 rounds was about the most I could stand. And I said, Richard, how is it that you just keep coming and hitting and coming and hitting? And he said, pressure busts pipes. That was his analogy. And pressure testing matters. And you should really do as much of it as you can while you can. I feel like I grew up kind of being pressure tested from the time I was a kid all the way through my 40s. I was always under pressure or put myself under pressure. And it's humbling, but again, as I've said a few times, I think it's really how you grow. And if you pull yourself out of that and you kind of prop yourself up too soon, you're really doing yourself a disservice. That may be offensive to a lot of people. I don't. It may
that's
be.
Their problem.
I don't know.
So as you look back on that time being pressured, what do you do with that information now as you work with others? Are you pressuring them? Are you encouraging them to find their own pressured situations?
No, I wouldn't encourage anybody to find pressure situations outside of training. So now I teach, and I teach Okinawan Shoin-ryu karate. And I'm probably about the most gentle teacher that I've ever known. Now,
does that say much though?
I don't know. I don't know what that says. But I don't have any children. It's teenagers and adults. My classes are small. Hell, a quarter of the dojo is my family, my kids. And I use drills for pressure testing, but I certainly don't train them the way that I trained. I don't know why that is. I don't know if there's a good way to explain that. But I think pressure testing is necessary. But I'm much more relaxed, it seems, when leading others down that path than I was with myself. I don't know why. Maybe it's age. That could be it.
Likely. We end up with these interesting common arcs on the show, and one of them is, when I was young, I trained super duper crazy hard, and I loved that, and that was great. But I got older, and I realized that wasn't the only way to do it. And now I teach, and I'd rather people come in to class every opportunity and learn that way than just smashing them against the wall and have them come when they're healed.
Yeah. And you've trained for a long time as well, and injuries are nothing but setbacks. They're not badges of honor.
It delays progress.
It does. That's what I do now. So I'm 54 now, and I train. I've never not trained. I don't think there's ever been a week that I've gone without training. I don't think there's ever. I've tried to think about it. I don't think there's more than a week or so. Even on vacation, I train. But now I manage the intensity of my training with what my body's able to do to avoid injury, so that I can keep training consistently. And maybe it's doing that has helped me realize that is a better pathway long term for everybody to actually advance and progress. It's not about a sprint and then a stagger. It's about a long, slow, steady jog and accumulating knowledge, injury-free, scar tissue-free, and just keep moving and advancing.
If you can get, I like the number 1%, but as you get deeper into training, even that's too much. If you can get 0.25% better every time you train and continue to do that, it shouldn't be hard in an hour of training to find something that you can get like a tiny little bit better at. And if you just keep doing that, where do you end up in 5, 10, 20 years? Get pretty darn good.
Yeah.
You mentioned weightlifting. I enjoy lifting because I think philosophically similar to martial arts, that investment in yourself. But what I like about it in a way more is that you've got numbers to work with. What derails everyone at the gym? Ego. They ignore their body saying, you should not lift this weight today. And then they get hurt. And then they're out for whatever period of time. And they come back and they're frustrated. They're not where they were. They're not where they should be. I'm using air quotes for listeners. And some of them will try to rush it and get hurt again. Oh, I can't lift anymore. I just keep getting hurt. Whereas the smart people will say, you know what? I'm going to meet my body where I'm at and do what I can and trust that I will progress again and try not to make the same mistakes.
Yes. Weight training, that's a great analogy and comparison, because weight training, as you said, it's an investment in yourself. Even weight training is the same way. So I was always a skinny, kind of a puny teenager. I was kind of a skinny teenager. I didn't like being skinny. It doesn't go well with Kyokushin, right? It's not so I said, we need to build up this house. And I started weight training with that ego and not really understanding and pushing and trying to do as much as possible, and injuries and setbacks. But then you realize you start to educate yourself, and you start to learn about progressions, methods of progressions. And if you slow down and you listen to your body and follow these methods of progression and change them all the time, your body will continually adapt to that stress. And you can do it injury-free as long as you don't rush it. As long as you don't rush it and you leave your ego at home.
People forget that your body gets stronger not during the physical act of lifting the weights, but it's in the recovery later. You don't need to destroy your body to get stronger, and beating it up more doesn't make you stronger faster. It's actually the opposite.
Yes.
Our martial arts training is similar. Our practice, it's not for the sake of practice. It should be the implementation of information that you don't have fully embodied yet. At some points, you got to take a step back and go, what am I training and why am I training it?
Yes. Absolutely.
So what's coming next? you've called attention to your age and where you're at a couple times. So I get the sense that that's something that's on your mind, where you are as a man, someone who's been training for 40 plus years, and maybe you can't go as hard as you did all the time, but there's a country song that you might not know. You can still go as hard as you wanted to once, if you need it. But do you think about these things?
It's funny. For the very first time, and again, I know we talked about the past, and I trained in jiu-jitsu for quite some time, went away to it, came back, went to a judo club, trained in judo for some years, left that, trained in different martial arts for different reasons at different times. But what's happened now, just in the last few years, is I've come full circle. I've kind of come back to what originally brought me in, and my original love of martial arts, which is karate. And I think during all of these travels over the 40-something years in different places, I've always had that in my heart and certainly in my body. I had a hard time boxing because I was a karate guy, right? Why am I moving to the side? Why don't I just come straight in and hit you? And if you run, how about I just push you into the corner? There I can hit you more. So I was not the greatest boxer. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was so different that it took me out of that element, and I became fairly proficient at that, but there's always a lot more to learn there. But now, at this age, I've come back around full circle to something that was very formative, and it feels comfortable. It feels like coming home after a long time away. So, to be honest, for the first time in quite a few years, I'm really content. I like where I've been. I feel comfortable with the knowledge that I have. That doesn't mean that I've put myself up on that pedestal by any stretch. I'm still learning all the time. But I like where I am. I train hard. I keep myself in good shape, but I get to pass knowledge along to, number one, my kids. I enjoy that. But also the other students in my little small dojo here. So I really enjoy teaching. Gives me an opportunity to train. And there's an odd contentedness in it. So I'm hoping that there's no more change. I like where I am, and I like what I'm doing right now. Feels good.
Do you think you would have enjoyed it as much if you hadn't taken the detours?
I think I had to take the detours. And I think I took just enough detours for me to feel complete, if that makes any sense. It's kind of like test driving cars. You go out and maybe you hop in a little compact and you go, this one's too small. It's like Goldilocks and the Three Bears almost. This bed's too soft. This one's too hard. But come to find out, the first bed was just right. And it could be for a number of reasons. But I think because that's the way I grew up. That's what I grew up doing. That's what I know. That's really what's in me and what's in my bones. So I think I had to go out and do all these different things in order to come back to what I know and love the most and really appreciate it.
If we sit down 5, 10, 15 years from now, and I say, Aric, what have you been up to training wise? What's transpired since the last time we talked? What would you hope you would be saying?
Number one, 15 years from now, I hope I'm still able to move and train the way the way that I want to. I'm actually pretty fortunate considering injuries that I've had in training that I can still move as well as I do. So now my goal, what I would hope is that I can still do exactly what I'm doing, that I can still train. I can still train full force. I can still lift. I can still spar and move. And if I feel like it, I can get down on the mat and do some light rolling and maybe go do a little boxing and some sparring, something not as hard as I used to, but that I'm still able to do it. Now it becomes almost about maintaining health and just enjoying passing along the little bit of knowledge that I've acquired. So hopefully I can keep doing that.
I hope so. School website, social media, anything like that you want to share with people?
Yeah. In Culpeper, it's studio120va.com. So I share a space with a Pilates yoga studio up there. I'm up there a couple nights a week. Iwa Dojo. Mm-hmm. If you look at Iwa Dojo in Delaware, that's my teacher's website, Andy Rodriguez. And then Iwa Dojo in Virginia, there's a Facebook page, Facebook group, also on Instagram. Mm-hmm. Iwa Dojo, IWADOJA.
Awesome. What thoughts, what words do you have for the listeners today as we wrap up? What do you want to leave them with?
Interestingly, I think maybe something that you touched on before. I assume that our listeners are all training, or most of them are training. They're martial arts.
I'd say 99+%.
Yeah. Leave your ego behind. Enjoy being a student. Go out and learn all you can. Keep the cup half full. And maybe you'll be real surprised at what it fills up with and where it can take you.
I hope you like that story, that conversation. Sensei Aric's a good guy. And I'm sure, I'll say that, I'll draw that line in the sand. I'm sure we're going to get the chance to work together again, being in the same place. Thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for sharing your time and your story. I had fun. Listeners, check out whistlekickmartialartsradio.com for all the show notes, where you're going to find videos and links and social media and pictures and a lot more, not just for this episode, but for every single one we've ever made. We don't paywall them. We don't do anything silly like that, like a lot of other shows do. Now, if you're up for supporting us and the work that we do, remember, you've got lots of choices. You could share an episode, leave a review on whatever podcast platform you use, tell a friend about what we're working on, or contribute to our Patreon, patreon.com/whistlekick. Are you interested in having me come to your school for a seminar? I can do that. I do a good job at that, and I enjoy it. So just let me know. Don't forget the code podcast15 saves you 15% on anything at whistlekick.com. And if you have guest topic suggestions, perhaps feedback, something like that, I want to hear about it. You can email me, jeremy@whistlekick.com. Our social media for everything Whistlekick related is @whistlekick. Until next time, train hard, smile, and have a great day.